This morning, Dr. Luncheon, the head of the Presidential Secretariat and Secretary to the Cabinet, will bring you highlights on a number of matters Cabinet wished to bring to the public's attention through the media, after which we will entertain questions on his opening statement and any other questions on topical issues. Dr. Luncheon.
Thank you, Christine, and good morning again, ladies and gentlemen of the media. Two successive meetings on Thursday, the 30th of April, and on Tuesday, the 4th of June, and the cabinet deliberations over those two meetings led us now to the point the agenda, contracts, Parliament, CARICOM China, and then cabinet snippets. As is usual, allow me to start with contracts for which cabinet granted its no objections. In the agricultural sector, drainage and irrigation, the procurement of super long-reach hydraulic excavators for the Drainage and Irrigation Authority. Super long-reach hydraulic excavators. And that award, $299.4 million. $299.4 million. Housing and water. Construction of roads, drains, and structures from Horstelling to Diamond on the East Bank, Demerara, Region 4. These awards were in 10 lots, aggregately $1,216.1 million. $1,216.1 million. 10 lots for the construction of roads, drains, and structures from Horstelling to Diamond on the east bank of Demerara. Finance, the supply and delivery and installation of hardware and software for the disaster recovery system at the Ministry of Finance. That's the supply, the delivery, and the installation of hardware and software for the disaster recovery system. 205,000 US dollars. 205,000 US dollars. Security. Procurement of spares for the Bell 412. Procurement of spares for the Bell 412. 105,000 US dollars. 105,000 US dollars. Environmental sector. Construction of the Protected Areas Commission headquarters. This is in Thomaslands in the National Park, an award of $28.0 million. $28.0 million. Again, in national security, the docking and repairs for the national flagship GFS Equibo, $32.3 million. $32.3 million for the docking and repairs for the national flagship. security, sorry, public works. And here we're speaking specifically of the Guyana Power and Light. Construction of the fuel wharf, the fuel pipeline for the 26, this is the new power station being installed over on the West Bank. The 26 Medj Wärtsilä generator project, Green Hope, on the West Bank of the Demerara in Region 3, $242.1 million for the construction of the fuel wharf and the fuel pipeline for the 26 megs of the Wärtsilä generator project. Legal aid, supply, installation, configuration, and wiring of the air-conditioned units of the Georgetown Magistrate Courts. Supply, installation, configuration, and wiring of air-conditioned units. These will be installed at the Georgetown Magistrate Courts, $24.7 million. $24.7 million. Housing and water. This is the last. The upgrade of roads, Amelia's Ward, Phase 1B in Linden, in Region 10. 2 lots. Aggregately $168.6 million for the upgrading of roads in Amelia's Ward, Phase 1, Linden, Region 10. Parliament. The opposition positions on critical issues that have been brought before the House, that's the National Assembly, have been and are being studied and has been detailed in, among other places, press briefings, post-cabinet press briefings. Trends have been identified as they have emerged. It is evident that the opposition has been failing to respond to the logic of national development, the national interests, where issues of that nature are concerned. It is evident that the opposition is much more interested in denying and frustrating the execution of Government of Guyana programs. Their conformed positions on Minister Rohi, on the anti-money laundering legislation, the customs bill, all lead us to one position, one opinion, and that is their entrenched anti-national and anti-development posture in Parliament. Guyana's future, Guyana's development is not above their attempts to enforce the benefits of the one-seat parliamentary majority and protection of their partisan interests. The opposition is willing to disregard the logical and the predictable outcomes of their parliamentary actions, even when it affects national development. The level of opposition activities and its assessment at the level of Parliament, and particularly at the parliamentary committees and stage of the parliamentary committees, is notably less dogmatic. There is often a dysfunction at this juncture between their approach at the level of the National Assembly, the full House, and proceedings at the level of the parliamentary committees. The situation there does not engender, this is at the level of the parliamentary committees. The situation there does not engender the same level of hopelessness that has emerged during sittings and the debates at the level of the full House. CARICOM, China. Cabinet welcomed the details of the report presented by the President about the meeting of CARICOM heads and the President of the People's Republic of China that recently was held in Trinidad and Tobago. President Ramatar disclosed that the heads conveyed CARICOM and its growing and mutually beneficial development in the bilateral and the multilateral relationships with the Chinese government and the Chinese partners. Coming so soon after the celebrations of 40 years of cooperation, the Chinese president disclosed his government's continued support for the region in specific areas, trade and aid and development. And these were areas that were given great attention during the bilaterals that took place at the meeting of the heads and the Chinese president. Cabinet granted its approval to Fly Jamaica, the airline, to operate the Guyana, New York, the Georgetown, New York, and the Georgetown, Toronto routes. The approval came after the standard evaluative procedures by the Guyana Civil Aviation Authority and the recommendation to Cabinet by the Minister of Public Works, Robeson Bell. Cabinet also endorsed the recommendation of the minister to conduct an investigation into the conditions under which that ill-fated aircraft involved in that fatal East Coast Demerara crash, the conditions under which that aircraft was operated in Guyana. Cabinet also endorsed the recommendations flowing from the solid waste management proposals that had been responding to requirements for expressions of interest into the recycling of garbage. The Ministry of Local Government and Regional Development presented a status report on the examination of the proposals that had been received. And those reports identified 6 forms that had expressed interest, 3 of which had submitted formidable proposals that emphasize a number of issues, including the regional and domestic experiences in recycling, domestic and international experiences in recycling, contributions by the government of Guyana in a recycling project, as well as the government of Guyana, their inputs, the financial plans, and their commercial operations into project implementation. The Ministry of Public Works indicated that additional time was needed to bring on board the recommendations that were the responses that were outstanding from the forums that had expressed an interest in participating in recycling of the solid waste products in the area. Anti-money laundering. The anti-money laundering, combating the financing of terrorism Amendment Bill 2013. The opposition appears unaware of the process by which the drafting of the amendments, the legislative amendments to the Parent Act of 2006 evolved. Guyana, like all participating states, its compliance with international norms and treaty obligations was evaluated through the MEM, and that is the evaluation mechanism by which peers evaluated each other. So all of the participating states in the FATF were evaluated by other participating states. And this is a continuous process. And in the case of Guyana, it identified our peers, sovereign states, participating states, identified deficiencies in a number of areas. But the one that interests us in the legislative area, those deficiencies and those weaknesses were compiled, agreed upon with the administration and led to the drafting of amendments which were brought together to be the subject of the amendment bill that was placed before the House. Guyana worked with the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force and the donor community that is both domestic, regional, and international to perfect the preparation, the drafting and preparation of those amendments. I say this because there seems to be a view that these amendments were isolatedly the work of the AG's chamber and the government of Guyana. Its origin, I repeat, was on the basis of the evaluation mechanism by our peers, other sovereign countries that evaluated our performances, our compliance, and on the basis identified weaknesses for which the legislative drafts were approved, were funded, and approved by the government and ended up being laid in Parliament. What has complicated Guyana's more recent situation with the amendment bill has been the deliberate attempts by the opposition to use the situation, that one seat majority, to either force horse trading on the government. I scratch your back, you scratch my back, or to attempt to punish the administration for imagined slights that may have occurred during the period leading up to the presentation of the amendment bill to Parliament. Being quite aware of the consequences of not amending the Parent Act and not enacting the amendment bill, the opposition has signaled to Guyanese, to the parties, the participating states, its willingness to inflict those consequences on the other, so long as it can blame the PPPC administration for such an outcome. Finally, Cabinet approved the grant of its agreement for the appointment of the new Canadian High Commissioner, Her Excellency Dr. Nicole Giles, and this career diplomat will be resident in Guyana, and she will be succeeding the former High Commissioner of Guyana, His Excellency David Devine, whose tenure came to an end, is coming to an end in August of 2030. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, those are the matters I wanted to bring to your attention. Time is available, and I sense that there should be a gesture from the Cabinet Secretary. So, ladies and gentlemen, the floor is open changes on matters in my opening statement, as well as any other matters that we judge are topical. Thank
Dr.
you.
Luncheon, Dennis Shabbat and Rowley. Sir, could you say how much money Fly Jamaica has had to put up as a bond, and if there were any other requirements that it had to fulfill that led to the decision by cabinet?
I speak guardedly because I must admit the understanding from cabinet in terms of protocols is that they would be fully attended to at the point in time that the minister brings the recommendation to grant the operating license. But I am advised, I was told, I recall hearing that a bond of 40 million was the sum, the value of the bond that was required, and which Fly Jamaica, I would assume, is deposited as one of the elements, the requirements for licensing in the end.
Any other
What's the second
requirements?
part?
Any other requirements they have had to fulfill?
Those I don't recall hearing, but as I said, they obviously are quite a few. You might be aware that, you must be aware that the application to operate by Fly Jamaica has been with us for some time, as the due process was being discharged by GCAA. My feeling is the details of that process would be more accurately provided by the Minister of Public Works, who is responsible for civil aviations. Yes, Adam.
Adam, on the same Flight Jamaica, 3 weeks ago, I remember you saying there was no petition, although we had heard that there was one before,
No petition.
for Flight Jamaica. Now, nothing had come to cabinet as yet.
Yes.
When did this petition come to cabinet, and when was the decision taken?
I think I made mention some time ago that a feature of the agenda corrections, because indeed what I should have said was that I was unaware
Oh, okay.
that a submission had been made, because it was drawn to my attention shortly thereafter that the Ministry of Public Works had indeed made a submission, but it had arrived outside of the time frame for its inclusion on the cabinet's agenda. I don't know if it was 3 weeks ago. I can't state it. Definitely was more than 1 week, last week we didn't meet. But it did, the submission by the minister was actually at the cabinet office, but it was submitted too late to get on the agenda. It was subsequently put on the agenda, and cabinet ultimately provided its approval for Flight Jamaica to operate, as I said, Georgetown, New York, Georgetown, Toronto.
When will it begin flying? Is there an indication?
I would hate to tell Adam the same thing I told Dennis, but that is probably a detail with which I'm unfamiliar. But I would, the urgency, as I could recall saying to a number of my colleagues who were absent from the cabinet meeting, that the approval had been given, and they do a fair bit of traveling, and they are aware of the costs that they incur in the current configuration. Too few operators, and they welcome the cabinet decision, and I suppose like most of the traveling public, we would hope that operations by Flight Jamaica would commence maybe the 4th of January 2012. 2013, like yesterday. This is what I sense my colleagues are saying.
Mark Sketcher News. On the drainage and irrigation contract,
The excavators.
yes,
now,
299.4 million. How many excavators are you buying?
I can't believe it's one. I doubt whether for that money you're going to get more than two. So I would say guardedly, it's two. It's too much for one,
Okay.
and it's too little to get more than two.
I didn't quite understand what you were saying about the solid waste issue. Is it that government is...
Government has put out there an expression of interest to deal with recycling of solid waste. This accompanies the government's initiative for solid waste that been operationalized in all of the regions. Solid waste collection has been implemented through public-private participations in the 10 regions. But this one here deals specifically with recycling, and I think much of it is in recognition that a lot of the waste is recyclable, and therefore there was an expression of interest that was out there, and 6 forums, local and regional and international forums, responded expressing interest. So far, 3 of them, I said, presented formidable submissions, proposals, how they intend to operate. And those 3 and their proposals were what we examined in the cabinet yesterday. The other 3 are reputable forums, and the feeling was we need to see what they have to offer too. The 17th of June and 2 will be the drop dead date for their submissions, and at that point we will have now a most comprehensive picture of the interest and the nature of the interest of recycling forms in the Guyana market.
So my question was, Dr. Lanchan, the government's involvement in such recycling plan, that's what I wanted to know. You said that there was going to be some aspect of government involvement in the project.
What I was saying is that the submission, the 3 submissions, the 3 proposals had government of Guyana contributions to establishing or bringing the proposals into life. The usual things. They wanted concessions on equipment, on setting up the technology and acquisition of land and things like that. And of course, some amount of, what should be the word? They needed to have a guarantee that the Guyana market would provide X amount of recyclable material. You don't want to set up a big recycling plant and then you discover that you are no longer, or you're not getting the volume of recyclable material that would allow you to implement your operational plan. So that's what I was making reference to. All of them, well, not all of them, the 3 forums whose proposals were examined, all of them had those inclusions as to what they think or what they would require the government to contribute were they to actually be given the go-ahead to establish a recycling of solid waste in Guyana.
A little bit further, could you say what those 3 firms are interested in recycling?
Recyclable material, like, I suppose, the bottles, plastic bottles, styrofoam. I'm not too learned in this area of what is recyclable, but I do know there's a domestic form that I personally was introduced to that had started a bit of recycling of plastics. I don't think the form is still in existence, but obviously the interest that the 3 forms had must have reposed in awareness that there's a lot of plastic material, bottles and cans and containers and such like that can be recycled.
If,
Outside, go ahead. Go ahead, it's outside as well, you go ahead.
outside, stepping outside. Dr. Luncheon, yesterday there was another maternal death. And about 2 years back, we sat here when we had a spated amount of worries. And you said that a system had been put in place where there'd be monthly reports to the administration. We haven't heard anything about any report, any finding, but we keep hearing a probe is launched. We never, ever, ever hear anything on the probe. It launched, but disappear in space. What's going on?
I share some of your concerns about the way in which the cabinet undertakings that were made public by myself, former President Jack Dio, former Minister Leslie Ramsamy, on the cabinet monitoring of maternal and infant deaths. I share some of your concerns in that area, and indeed to inform you and the public that we do get reports, and of course these reports are generated by the institutions where the maternal death would have occurred. Those reports would indicate the review of the circumstances of the maternal death by the special body of clinicians, I guess you would call them, or specialists, that set up by Minister Ramsamy during his tenure, continued in operations, and we get those reports. I have on record of saying to my colleagues that Cabinet Office is unhappy about the reports and the way in which the commitment to get those reports, this is the comprehensive reports, in a timely way. So what is it that we're facing? I am familiar with the details of the maternal deaths as they occur. They're sent to cabinet. What we are not happy about is the results of the engagement at the Ministry of Health by the, let's call it the special committee of clinicians, specialists who oversee the developments that led to the maternal death and make pronouncements. I'm also not happy, and I think my cabinet colleagues join me, with recommendations that arise from the deliberations of that select body that addresses the doctors, nurses, the staff, institutional arrangements that may have been contributory. And because this committee is allowed to make recommendations, what essentially has happened with the enforcement, implementation of those engagements, those recommendations. So we are, in essence, familiar with the death and given the information. But that part of the monitoring that depends on the submission of the consideration by the expert group, I think that's probably the best way we should designate this body, the expert group that sit at the Ministry of Health and consider the circumstances surrounding each maternal death based on the reports from the hospital, post-mortem reports and whatnot, make findings and make recommendations that is where our concern, because those things don't flow in a timely way. This most recent maternal death, I think we will have to prepare ourselves to get a report or to be obtaining a report from this expert group in an untimely way. We wouldn't get it tomorrow or next week. I have been advised that it takes some time to get the information together, constitute meetings, get the post-mortem reports and such like. But I still feel much more can be done at the level of the Ministry of Health to actually expedite that process and allow us at cabinet level to be more aware of circumstances and what kinds of interventions are needed or being recommended by the expert group to forestall maternal deaths or decrease the incidence of maternal deaths.
Is there a cover-up? Do you see the first thing being the cover-up and then anything else after?
You mean cover up?
Cover up
death?
whatever.
Oh, cover up the cause?
Yeah.
It's difficult to say yes or no. Most of us, but I'm quite aware that I come in a privileged position because of my work in the health sector. But a lot of these deaths are unavoidable. A lot of them are unavoidable.
Unavoidable.
Unavoidable. You present with an abruptio placenta. There's some catastrophic outcomes during labor that whether it occurs in Aranca, Georgetown Hospital, Belvedere Suite, in the third world elsewhere, in the developing world, the developed world, your chances are slim when these devastating occurrences take place. So we have to start out with there's a subset that is not unique to the other, that will develop in the terminal stages of pregnancy during labor that commonly lead to the death of both mother and child. And they're recorded about legions of such instances, such cases. The question that you might ask are in those instances where these deaths are avoidable and there's some judgment that there would be disclosures of the avoidable aspects of this death or these deaths, and under those circumstances there might be some interest in having that information withheld or that information distorted. That is why Cabinet's monitoring has been put in place to ensure that we do indeed have access to the fullness of the investigation, that it isn't Ministry of Health alone, that post-mortem reports and such like compiled and presented to Cabinet for us to review. So I can't be dismissive of efforts, but I would say that by far and large, what we have put in place have suffered from the sloth of its implementation. It's not been abandoned, but as I'm saying for this case that occurred 2 days ago, I wouldn't be surprised if that special expert group report get to the Cabinet Subcommittee on Health and Health Monitoring sometime in June, maybe even in July, to deal with a maternal death that occurred in the very early part of June 2013. That is where some of our dissatisfaction lies.
Dr. Lanchan, for example, could you say what is the possibility, or rather expectation, of the President and the opposition leader agreeing on the confirmation of the acting Chief Justice and Chancellor of the Judiciary?
Yeah, this is a matter that is attracted quite a bit of attention lately. That's a long history that I am certain that you might not be interested in. But I don't believe that the positions of the president and the position of the leader of the opposition would be easily reconciled. We, that is in my presence, I am aware that on at least 2 occasions, the matter attracted the interest of the president in having these 2 judges, confirmed judges who've been acting for quite some length of time. Not bringing it to the public's attention is essentially a reflection of an old practice where if we are going to say anything, that it usually is in the form of a joint statement around which both parties would have offered no objections as to its accuracy in reflecting what took place during the engagement. But because it is all now out in the open, what actually took place and differences in recollection of what took place, I feel moved to respond to your question in a disclosive sort of way, and to say that the president indicated his extreme unhappiness with the current situation. Chancellor and the Chief Justice acting for so long and sought the input of the leader of the opposition in confirming the appointments. The leader of the opposition was unprepared to so do, and throughout to the president a different approach. What has historically been our interpretation of the constitutional provisions is the president say, I am interested, I would like to appoint the Chief Justice or appoint the Chancellor, and because you have to agree, do you agree? What transpired, my recollection is that that procedure was not acceptable to the leader of the opposition. And his offer as an alternative included going out into the public to solicit interested parties in the appointment as a chancellor and a chief justice in Guyana. The president, on subsequent engagement, made known his grave concerns about going in that path, going down that way, and practically informing the leader of the opposition of his intention not to go down that road, and soliciting the leader of the opposition's understanding of why he wouldn't want to go down that road. My recollection was the leader of the opposition was insistent, number one, in not agreeing to make the appointments to confirm these 2 officers and putting back on the table this process of inviting applications for this work. And by some process in evaluating applicants, I am not certain whether we are in possession of some model by the leader of the opposition how this would work, but in having an evaluative mechanism put in place, the results of which I presume the leader of the opposition would consume to be binding on the president and on the leader of the opposition. Our understanding, and this I think the president's point essentially was, this is not how it should be. The president and his engagement constitutionally driven with the leader of the opposition on the appointment of the Chancellor and the Chief Justice did not involve a process that brought the hands of the legislature, brought the hands of the executive into that process. Our habitual behavior, what has been the practice, the president nominates and the leader of the opposition says yes or no, then the president returns with a new set of submissions, the leader of the opposition says yes or no. This invitation to the public for expressions of interest or applying for this position, this is a novelty that I want to believe the president in unmistakable terms conveyed to the leader of the opposition his unwillingness to go down that road.
Dr. Lecture, follow up.
Sure.
Sir, can you say what is wrong with breaking with novelty? And in terms of going out there and seeking and having expressions of interest, I'm just trying to get in your disclosive mode, as you put it, what is the thinking behind the executive's decision not to accept the approach by the leader of the opposition?
Well, I suppose if you ask me theoretically what is wrong with considering that option, I might be provoked to asking what is wrong with continuing with a time-tested model, one that, as far as I know, has governed such appointments in Guyana, and I suspect in most, if not all, of the Commonwealth countries. And I will remind you what my mother told me that I told Adam. You mustn't be the first to abandon the old. Neither should you be the first to snatch up the new. You may rue the day. So if you said to me that there was indeed, apart from its novelty, some additional merit that attended this new proposal of the leader of the opposition, I think we'll have an engagement. But this is just novelty. I am not of the opinion that the discourse has been had nor concluded that says we need to reject what has been the practice here and elsewhere in favor of this novel approach.
So you're saying, sir, just for the sake of clarity, that Mr. Glacier did not suggest what might be the reasons behind his proposal. He did not give any meritorious reasons. Did he? Didn't.
Did he what?
Did he offer any reasons as far as merit for his position?
Well, they may very well have been the leader of the opposition saying that I want to abandon, but you got to be careful with the word merit. You got to be careful with the word merit. I don't believe that the leader of the opposition in his presentation to the president was actually saying that there was a merit in this approach that was lacking in the other approach. In other words, there's a reason for us abandoning this approach that is the convention. And that's why I agree with you with the word novelty. Its only attribute, as far as I am concern was its novelty. It's a new way of doing things. But in terms of an argument about its merit, I don't believe that the leader of the opposition advanced that kind of methodology that says this has merit as opposed to this one that has demerit.
So currently as it stands, it's not fair to say that government has closed the door in the to the suggestion, in the absence of any details from Mr. Granger as to the merits of going his way, as opposed to the time testing route.
My answer to that essentially is the constitutional provision. The president appoints. It's not the president and the leader of the opposition appoints. There is no defined process that involves the leader of the opposition other than agreeing with or not agreeing with the president's nominee. The leader of the opposition, in his own interpretation of the necessary agreement with the president on the appointment, has gone further and said it's not only I have to agree with the president, I think I have to have an input into how the president arrives at the decision that he's bringing to me. In other words, the president and I will work on getting an agreement, which essentially is inconsistent with the constitutional provision. The president will appoint. The leader of the opposition has to agree. How the leader of the opposition has taken that straightforward, rather, dogmatic statement to mean that I have to be part of a process of selection out of which you and I will make a joint appointment or something of that nature is what escapes us. And I don't think that the president, in his engagement with the leader of the opposition, has allowed that confusion to be maintained. The president has made it quite clear. You see the road you're talking about, bro? I'm not interested in going down the road. I am aware that this is the model, and I am proposing the appointment or the confirmation of these two notable judges who have been acting for 6, 8, 10 years as the topmost judges in the judiciary.
Dr. National, very quickly,
No,
sir.
take your time. We have some time. Take your time.
Very quickly, sir, can you say,
Force on force. And to advise, I gave the second one first, and to advise that those allegations surface, as far as I know, in the disclosures made by the prosecutor or the prosecutor general from Argentina, I think it was. And those disclosures were the force that been brought to our attention indirectly, because I know for a fact that the Argentine government, international bodies, have not submitted to the government of Guyana in any official way that they have evidence or they have concerns about setting up of terrorist cells by Iran in Guyana. So I think, apart from an allegation, a disclosure made by a high official, I think he's the prosecutor general or somebody up there in the hierarchy in the Argentinian prosecutorial in structures and in their bodies. Apart from that disclosure, that recent disclosure, my answer to you is no. Neither our bilaterals nor the international community has made any formal notification to the government of Guyana about the setting up of terrorist cells by the Iranians in Guyana to distinguish a license as opposed to what? You said
Permission.
a permission. I don't know if I could answer this way, if it would suffice, to say that the applicants sought a license to do radio broadcast. That's what the applicants sought.